Marcus Chen stood in front of the bathroom mirror, adjusting his black belt for the 100th time that morning. Today was different from any other day in his 28 years of life. The reflection staring back at him showed a man who had dedicated 15 years to perfecting the ancient art of Taekwondo. But today he would step into the corporate world for the first time. The championship trophies lined up on his dresser caught the morning sunlight streaming through his apartment window. Golden figures frozen in kicking poses reminded him of countless victories in rings across the country. Marcus had earned his reputation as one of the most disciplined fighters in the national circuit. His specialty was the devastating spinning heel kick that had knocked out 3 opponents in the past year alone. But those days were behind him now. His aging body, marked by years of intense training and competition, needed a break. The constant travel, the rigid diet, and the pressure to maintain his ranking had worn him down. When his coach suggested he consider retirement, Marcus knew it was time to find a new path. The job at Pinnacle Security Systems seemed like a perfect transition. His martial arts background made him an ideal candidate for their executive protection services. The company specialized in providing security for high-profile clients, and they needed someone with real fighting skills, not just theoretical knowledge from a textbook. Marcus grabbed his keys and headed toward his beat-up Honda Civic. The car looked out of place next to the expensive vehicles in his apartment complex. But he had always been practical with money. Every dollar he earned from fighting went toward paying for his training, equipment, and travel expenses. Luxury was never a priority when survival in the competitive world of martial arts demanded such sacrifice. The drive to downtown took 40 minutes through heavy morning traffic. Marcus used the time to review everything he knew about his new employer. Pinnacle Security had been in business for 12 years and maintained contracts with several Fortune 500 companies. Their reputation was spotless, and their training programs were considered among the best in the industry. The company headquarters occupied 3 floors of a glass tower that reflected the busy city streets below. Marcus parked in the visitor section and walked toward the main entrance. His leather portfolio containing his certifications, references, and medical clearances tucked under his arm. The lobby impressed him immediately. Polished marble floors stretched toward a reception desk where 2 professional-looking women greeted visitors. Security cameras were positioned strategically throughout the space, and Marcus noticed at least 4 exit points within his immediate view. His trained eye automatically assessed potential threats and escape routes, a habit developed through years of competitive fighting. Sarah Martinez, the Human Resources Director, met him at the elevator on the 15th floor. She was a sharp woman in her early 40s, who spoke with the confidence of someone accustomed to making important decisions quickly. During their phone conversations, she had expressed genuine excitement about bringing someone with Marcus's background into their team. The orientation room contained 6 other new recruits, all men between the ages of 25 and 40. Marcus studied each face, noting their postures and the way they carried themselves. 2 appeared to have military backgrounds based on their rigid bearing and short haircuts. Another seemed nervous, constantly checking his phone and avoiding eye contact with the others. Sarah began the presentation by explaining the company's philosophy and core values. Pinnacle Security built its reputation on 3 pillars: professionalism, discretion, and measured response. Their clients paid premium rates because they could trust the company's personnel to handle sensitive situations without creating additional problems. The training program would last 6 weeks and cover everything from basic surveillance techniques to advanced threat assessment. Each recruit would be evaluated continuously, and only those who demonstrated the right combination of skills and judgment would receive permanent positions. Marcus felt confident about the technical aspects of the training. His martial arts background had taught him to read body language, anticipate movements, and respond to threats with appropriate force. However, he was less certain about the corporate culture and the complex social dynamics he would need to navigate. During the lunch break, he struck up a conversation with David Kim, one of the former military recruits. David had served 2 tours in Afghanistan before transitioning to private security work. They discovered they shared similar philosophies about using violence only as a last resort and the importance of maintaining physical and mental discipline. The afternoon session focused on legal aspects of security work. Marcus learned about the complex web of laws governing the use of force by private security personnel. Unlike police officers, Security guards operated under strict limitations regarding when and how they could physically intervene in situations. The instructor, a former police detective named Robert Walsh, emphasized that their primary job was to observe and report, not to engage in confrontations. Physical force should only be used to protect life or prevent serious injury, and even then, the response must be proportional to the threat. Marcus raised his hand during the discussion about self-defense scenarios. He wanted to understand how his martial arts skills would fit into the company's approach to conflict resolution. Robert's answer surprised him. The instructor explained that while physical capabilities were valuable, they could also become liabilities if not properly controlled. Clients hired Pinnacle Security to solve problems quietly and efficiently, not to create dramatic incidents that might attract unwanted attention. This perspective represented a significant shift from Marcus's previous career. In the ring, victory meant defeating your opponent through superior technique and strategy. In the security world, success meant preventing conflicts from escalating to the point where physical intervention became necessary. The day concluded with paperwork and scheduling for the following week's training modules. Marcus left the building feeling optimistic about his career change but also aware of the challenges ahead. He would need to adapt his mindset from that of a warrior to that of a guardian. On the drive home, he reflected on the irony of his situation. After spending years learning to fight, he was now entering a profession where the goal was to avoid fighting whenever possible. The transition would require more mental adjustment than he had initially anticipated. That evening, Marcus called his former coach to share his impressions of the first day. The old man listened carefully before offering a piece of advice that would prove prophetic. Remember, son, knowing how to fight and knowing when to fight are two completely different skills. Make sure you master both. 3 weeks into his training at Pinnacle Security, Marcus had established himself as one of the top performers in his class. His physical conditioning and mental focus gave him significant advantages during the practical exercises. While other recruits struggled with the demanding physical requirements, Marcus moved through obstacle courses and defensive scenarios with the fluid precision that had made him a champion. The training facility occupied an entire floor of an industrial building on the outskirts of the city. Mock rooms replicated various environments where security personnel might work: corporate boardrooms, hotel lobbies, private residences, and outdoor venues. Each scenario presented different challenges and required specific protocols. Marcus excelled particularly in the role-playing exercises where recruits practiced dealing with difficult individuals. His years of competitive fighting had taught him to remain calm under pressure and read his opponent's intentions through subtle body language cues. What took other students hours to grasp came naturally to him. However, he struggled with the diplomatic aspects of the job. During one exercise simulating a corporate event, Marcus was too direct in his approach to removing an unwanted guest. The instructor criticized his technique, explaining that effective security work required finesse and the ability to manage situations without creating scenes that might embarrass the client. David Kim proved to be a valuable training partner and friend. The former soldier understood the challenge of adapting military skills to civilian contexts. During their lunch breaks, he shared stories about his transition from combat zones to private security work, offering practical advice about managing the psychological adjustment. The most difficult aspect of the training for Marcus was learning to de-escalate conflicts rather than prepare for them. His instincts told him to assess threats and position himself for optimal tactical advantage. The security protocols required him to prioritize communication and create distance rather than close gaps and prepare for physical engagement. Robert Walsh, the lead instructor, took a special interest in Marcus's development. After observing his performance during a mock scenario involving an aggressive intruder, Robert pulled him aside for a private conversation. The older man had recognized something in Marcus that concerned him. Robert explained that exceptional fighters often made poor security guards because they relied too heavily on their physical abilities. The most effective security professionals were those who could project authority without ever needing to prove it through force. He warned Marcus about the temptation to use skills that had served him well in his previous career. The warning proved timely when the class moved into firearms training. Marcus had never used guns during his martial arts career, and he approached the weapons with appropriate respect and caution. Other recruits who lacked his physical confidence seemed more comfortable with the equalizing power that firearms provided. The shooting instructor, a retired police officer named Janet Torres, emphasized that drawing a weapon represented the failure of all other security measures. She taught them that the mere presence of an armed security professional often deterred potential threats without any need for actual confrontation. Marcus found himself thinking about the philosophical differences between martial arts and security work. In Taekwondo, he had trained to engage with opponents who had chosen to fight. The security world required him to deal with people who might be confused, intoxicated, mentally ill, or simply having the worst day of their lives. The psychological training sessions led by Dr. Patricia Reynolds opened his eyes to the complexity of human behavior in crisis situations. She taught the recruits to recognize signs of mental illness, substance abuse, and emotional distress. Many confrontations could be avoided entirely by understanding the root causes of disruptive behavior and responding with appropriate compassion. One particular lecture focused on the concept of proportional response. Dr. Reynolds explained that security personnel had a moral and legal obligation to use the minimum amount of force necessary to resolve any situation. She showed video examples of incidents where security guards had overreacted to minor threats, resulting in lawsuits, criminal charges, and destroyed careers. Marcus began to understand that his martial arts background was both an asset and a potential liability. His physical capabilities gave him confidence and presence that clients valued, but they also carried the risk of overconfidence in situations that required restraint rather than action. The fourth week of training introduced scenario-based testing that would determine which recruits received job offers. Each student faced a series of increasingly complex situations designed to test their judgment, communication skills, and ability to follow protocols under pressure. Marcus's first test scenario placed him in a hotel lobby where he was responsible for managing access to a private event. An actor playing an intoxicated guest became increasingly belligerent when denied entry to the restricted area. The scenario required Marcus to maintain security while avoiding any physical confrontation that might disturb other hotel guests. He successfully de-escalated the situation by speaking calmly, acknowledging the man's frustration, and offering alternative solutions. The key was recognizing that the individual was embarrassed about being excluded rather than genuinely threatening. By addressing the emotional core of the conflict, Marcus was able to guide the person toward a face-saving exit. The second scenario tested his response to a genuine physical threat. An actor simulating a stalker attempted to approach a client despite clear warnings to maintain distance. When verbal commands failed, Marcus had to physically intervene, while ensuring that his response remained proportional to the actual danger presented. This exercise proved more challenging because it required him to engage his fighting instincts while maintaining strict control over the level of force applied. The evaluators watched carefully to see whether he would revert to his competitive mindset or demonstrate the restraint expected of security professionals. Marcus passed both scenarios, but the feedback revealed areas where he needed continued development. The evaluators noted that while his physical techniques were flawless, he sometimes projected an intensity that might unnecessarily escalate tense situations. Robert Walsh delivered the critique with characteristic directness. He explained that Marcus's reputation as a fighter preceded him, and some people might interpret his presence as a challenge rather than a deterrent. Learning to modulate his energy and appear approachable while maintaining readiness would be crucial to his success. The final week of training focused on specific client types and venues. Pinnacle Security served everyone from corporate executives to entertainment celebrities, and each category presented unique challenges. The recruits learned about the different threat profiles, communication styles, and discretion requirements for various assignments. Marcus discovered that he was particularly well suited for corporate security work. His professional demeanor and ability to blend into business environments made him effective at protecting executives during meetings, conferences, and travel. The structured nature of corporate security appealed to his disciplined mindset. The graduation ceremony was held on a Friday afternoon in the company's main conference room. 6 of the original 8 recruits had successfully completed the program and would begin receiving assignments the following Monday. Marcus felt proud of his accomplishment but also nervous about transitioning from the controlled training environment to real-world situations. Sarah Martinez announced the initial assignments during the ceremony. Marcus would be working with the corporate security team, starting with relatively low-risk assignments that would allow him to gain experience while continuing to develop his professional skills. His first assignment would be providing security at a technology conference downtown, working alongside experienced team members who could mentor him through his initial cases. As he drove home that evening, Marcus reflected on how much he had learned during the past 6 weeks. The training had challenged him to think differently about conflict, power, and responsibility. He felt ready to begin this new chapter of his career, though he remained aware that real-world experience would teach him lessons that no training program could simulate. Marcus's first 3 months at Pinnacle Security exceeded his expectations in every way. The work challenged him intellectually, while allowing him to use his physical training in a constructive manner. He had been assigned to a diverse range of clients, from technology executives attending conferences to real estate developers hosting investor meetings. His reputation within the company grew steadily as supervisors recognized his reliability and professionalism. Unlike some newer employees who struggled with the transition from training to real-world applications, Marcus adapted quickly to the unpredictable nature of security work. The turning point in his career came when Sarah Martinez offered him a prestigious assignment. Meridian Financial, one of the city's largest investment firms, needed additional security for their annual shareholder meeting. The event would host over 500 attendees, including several high-profile investors who had received threats from disgruntled former employees. Marcus would be working alongside Jake Morrison, a 10-year veteran of Pinnacle Security, who had handled similar corporate events throughout his career. Jake was known for his calm demeanor and excellent judgment in complex situations. The partnership offered Marcus an opportunity to learn from one of the company's most respected professionals. The assignment briefing took place in Meridian Financial's downtown headquarters 3 days before the event. The building occupied 40 floors of a modern skyscraper with multiple entrances, underground parking, and connecting walkways to adjacent buildings. The complexity of the venue required careful planning and coordination between Pinnacle Security personnel and the building's existing security team. Thomas Bradley, Meridian's head of security, led the briefing session. He was a former FBI agent who brought a law enforcement perspective to corporate security planning. His presentation outlined the specific threats they needed to address, including 2 former employees who had made inflammatory statements on social media and a group of environmental activists who opposed the company's investment policies. The security plan divided the building into zones, with teams assigned to monitor specific areas and potential access points. Marcus and Jake would be positioned in the main lobby, where they could observe everyone entering the building and coordinate with other teams throughout the venue. Marcus spent the weekend reviewing the building's layout and studying photographs of individuals who might pose potential threats. The preparation reminded him of analyzing opponents before martial arts competitions, though the stakes felt different when dealing with real-world security concerns rather than sporting events. On the morning of the shareholder meeting, Marcus arrived at Meridian Financial 2 hours before the event's scheduled start time. The early arrival allowed him to walk through the building, familiarize himself with sightlines and emergency exits, and test communication equipment with other team members. Jake Morrison impressed Marcus immediately with his systematic approach to preparation. The veteran security professional had developed checklists and protocols that ensured nothing was overlooked during the setup process. His attention to detail reflected the professionalism that had made Pinnacle Security successful. The first few hours of the event proceeded smoothly. Shareholders arrived in small groups, checked in with registration staff, and proceeded to the conference room on the building's 20th floor. Marcus monitored the lobby while Jake coordinated with teams positioned throughout the building. Around noon, Marcus noticed a man in his 30s who seemed to be loitering near the information desk rather than proceeding to the registration area. The individual appeared nervous, frequently checking his phone and looking around the lobby, as if searching for someone or something specific. Marcus approached the man casually, introducing himself as building security and asking if he needed assistance finding a particular office or meeting room. The conversation revealed that the individual was attending the shareholder meeting but had arrived early and was waiting for a colleague before going upstairs. The interaction demonstrated one of the key skills Marcus had learned during training: the ability to investigate potential concerns without creating confrontational situations. By offering help rather than expressing suspicion, he gathered the information needed to assess whether the individual posed any threat. As the afternoon progressed, the environmental protest group that intelligence reports had warned about appeared outside the building. About 20 activists gathered on the sidewalk across the street, holding signs and chanting slogans about corporate responsibility and climate change. The protesters remained on public property and conducted themselves peacefully, so they did not require direct intervention. However, their presence created an additional variable that the security teams needed to monitor. Jake coordinated with local police to ensure that the demonstration would not escalate into more disruptive activities. Around 3 o'clock, Marcus observed a disturbance near the building's main entrance. A man in a business suit was arguing loudly with one of the building's security guards about access to the upper floors. The individual claimed to be a journalist covering the shareholder meeting, but he lacked proper credentials and refused to follow established check-in procedures. Marcus moved closer to observe the situation while Jake contacted the building's security office to verify the man's identity and purpose. The journalist became increasingly agitated as the building guard explained that all media representatives needed to be pre-approved and escorted by Meridian financial staff. The situation escalated when the journalist attempted to push past the security guard and access the elevator bank. The building guard, an older man in his 50s, tried to physically block the journalist's path, but was clearly overmatched by the younger, more aggressive individual. Marcus found himself facing the kind of split-second decision that would define his career in security work. His martial arts training told him to intervene immediately and neutralize the threat before it could develop further. His security training emphasized de-escalation and minimal force. He stepped forward and positioned himself between the journalist and the elevator bank, speaking in a calm but authoritative voice. Marcus explained the building's security procedures and offered to help the journalist contact Meridian Financial's media relations department to resolve the credentials issue. The journalist turned his attention to Marcus, apparently recognizing him as more formidable opposition than the older building guard. The man's aggressive posture and clenched fists suggested that he was prepared to use physical force to achieve his objectives. Marcus maintained his professional demeanor while assessing the threat level. The journalist appeared to be frustrated rather than genuinely dangerous, but his unpredictable behavior made the situation volatile. A physical confrontation in the busy lobby would create exactly the kind of disturbance that security professionals were hired to prevent. Jake Morrison arrived at the scene and immediately took control of the situation. His experience showed as he calmly explained the legal consequences of attempting to force entry into a private building and offered the journalist specific steps to resolve his access issues through proper channels. The combination of Jake's diplomatic approach and Marcus's physical presence convinced the journalist to step back and reconsider his approach. Within 5 minutes, the situation was resolved without any physical confrontation or disruption to the building's normal operations. The incident provided Marcus with valuable insight into the collaborative nature of professional security work. While his individual skills were important, the most effective response came from combining his capabilities with Jake's experience and communication skills. The shareholder meeting concluded successfully around 6 o'clock with no significant security incidents. The Meridian financial executives expressed satisfaction with Pinnacle Security's performance, and Thomas Bradley specifically complimented Marcus and Jake for their handling of the journalist situation. During the post-event debriefing, Jake offered Marcus feedback on his performance throughout the day. The veteran praised his awareness, positioning, and restraint during the confrontation with the journalist. However, he also suggested that Marcus could improve his communication skills by learning to project authority through verbal commands rather than physical presence. The advice resonated with Marcus because it addressed something he had sensed, but not fully articulated. His martial arts background gave him confidence in physical confrontations, but it also created a tendency to rely on intimidation rather than persuasion when managing difficult individuals. As he drove home that evening, Marcus reflected on how much he had learned during his first major corporate assignment. The work was more complex and nuanced than he had anticipated, requiring a combination of physical readiness, psychological insight, and communication skills that exceeded what any single training program could provide. The success of the Meridian Financial assignment would lead to additional opportunities and greater responsibilities within Pinnacle Security. However, it would also set the stage for a future incident that would test Marcus's judgment and potentially jeopardize everything he had worked to build in his new career. 6 months after the successful Meridian Financial assignment, Marcus had become one of Pinnacle Security's most requested personnel for high-profile corporate events. His combination of physical presence and professional demeanor made him particularly effective at managing complex situations without creating unnecessary drama. The assignment that would change everything came through Sarah Martinez on a Tuesday morning in late October. Blackstone Industries, a major defense contractor, needed security for a product launch event at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. The client specifically requested Marcus based on his reputation for handling corporate gatherings with sensitivity and discretion. The event would showcase Blackstone's new cybersecurity software to potential government clients and private sector partners. Over 300 attendees were expected, including military officials, technology executives, and international business representatives. The sensitive nature of the product and the high-profile guest list created unique security challenges. Marcus arrived at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel at 6 in the morning, 3 hours before the event's scheduled start time. The venue was impressive, a 5-star establishment with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and multiple ballrooms that could accommodate large gatherings. The hotel's own security team was professional and experienced, but Blackstone Industries wanted additional personnel to ensure complete coverage. Lisa Chen, the lead security coordinator for Blackstone Industries, conducted the briefing in the hotel's business center. She was a former military intelligence officer who understood the importance of protecting both physical assets and sensitive information. Her presentation outlined specific protocols for managing access to different areas of the event and protecting classified materials from unauthorized viewing. The security plan assigned Marcus to the main registration area, where he would work alongside hotel security to monitor attendees as they checked in and received their access credentials. His role included verifying invitations, directing guests to appropriate areas, and identifying anyone who seemed out of place or potentially problematic. The first few hours of the event proceeded exactly as planned. Government officials and corporate executives arrived in small groups, presented their invitations, and proceeded to the main ballroom where Blackstone's presentation would take place. Marcus found the work engaging because it required constant attention and quick decision-making. Around 11 o'clock, he noticed a man in his 40s who appeared to be having difficulty with the registration process. The individual claimed to be representing a European technology firm, but his name did not appear on the guest list and his invitation appeared to be a photocopy rather than an original document. Marcus approached the situation carefully, offering assistance while observing the man's behavior and responses. The individual became defensive when questioned about his credentials, claiming that there had been a miscommunication between his company and Blackstone Industries about his attendance, the registration. Staff contacted Lisa Chen to verify the man's identity and determine whether he should be admitted to the event. During the 15-minute wait for clarification, Marcus engaged the individual in casual conversation to assess whether he posed any potential threat. The man's story contained several inconsistencies that raised red flags. He claimed to work for a company that Marcus knew had recently been acquired by a competitor, and his knowledge of the cybersecurity industry seemed superficial for someone in his alleged position. However, corporate espionage was beyond Marcus's expertise, so he focused on maintaining security while allowing the appropriate authorities to investigate. Lisa Chen's investigation revealed that the man was indeed a legitimate business representative, but his company had not been invited to the event due to competitive concerns. The situation required diplomatic handling to avoid offending a potential future client while maintaining the exclusivity that Blackstone Industries wanted for their product launch. Marcus observed how Lisa handled the delicate situation, politely explaining that the event was by invitation only, but offering to arrange a separate meeting between the man's company and Blackstone Industries. Her approach demonstrated the kind of diplomatic skills that Marcus continued to develop in his security career. The afternoon session of the event featured classified presentations that required additional security measures. Access to the main ballroom was restricted to attendees with special clearance levels, and all electronic devices had to be surrendered at a secure checkpoint outside the room. Marcus was assigned to work with David Reynolds, a hotel security supervisor who had 20 years of experience managing high-security events. David was a large man with an imposing presence, but his management style relied more on intimidation than the professional diplomacy that Pinnacle Security emphasized. The first sign of trouble came when a group of technology journalists attempted to gain access to the classified session. They had legitimate press credentials for the general event, but the restricted session was off limits to media representatives. David's initial response was aggressive and confrontational, immediately creating tension with the journalists. Marcus intervened diplomatically, explaining the security requirements while acknowledging the journalists' professional interests. He offered to arrange interviews with Blackstone executives after the classified session concluded, giving the media representatives something valuable while maintaining the security boundaries. However, one journalist, a young woman named Jennifer Walsh, became increasingly persistent about gaining access to the restricted area. She argued that the information being presented had public interest implications and that excluding the media violated principles of transparent government contracting. David Reynolds lost patience with the situation and told the journalist to leave the area immediately or face removal from the entire event. His harsh tone and aggressive body language escalated the confrontation unnecessarily, attracting attention from other attendees and creating exactly the kind of scene that professional security work was designed to prevent. Marcus found himself in a difficult position. David was the senior security officer for the venue, so challenging his authority could create additional problems. However, the situation was clearly spiraling out of control due to David's poor communication skills and confrontational approach. The journalist refused to leave and demanded to speak with someone in authority about the media access policies. David moved closer to her, using his physical size to intimidate her into compliance. His behavior violated every principle of proportional response that Marcus had learned during his training. When Jennifer Walsh pulled out her phone to record the confrontation, David grabbed her wrist and attempted to take the device away from her. The physical contact crossed a clear legal boundary and created potential liability for both the hotel and Blackstone Industries. Marcus faced a split-second decision that would define his career and potentially his life. His training told him to de-escalate the situation and protect all parties from liability. His instincts told him that David's behavior was inappropriate and potentially dangerous. He stepped forward and placed his hand on David's shoulder, speaking in a calm but firm voice. Marcus suggested that they contact Lisa Chen to clarify the media access policies and resolve the situation through proper channels rather than physical confrontation. David turned toward Marcus with obvious anger, apparently viewing the intervention as a challenge to his authority. The hotel security supervisor was significantly larger than Marcus and had a reputation for using intimidation to control situations. The confrontation between Marcus and David attracted attention from other security personnel and event attendees. Lisa Chen arrived at the scene just as David shoved Marcus backward, creating a physical altercation in the middle of the hotel's main corridor. Marcus's martial arts training took over as his body automatically shifted into a defensive stance. Years of competition had programmed specific responses to physical aggression, and his muscle memory activated before his conscious mind could fully process the situation. The spinning heel kick that had won him 3 national championships landed perfectly on David's solar plexus, dropping the larger man to the marble floor in front of dozens of witnesses. The technique was executed with flawless precision, but the consequences would prove devastating to Marcus's carefully built new career. In the stunned silence that followed, Marcus realized that everything he had worked to achieve over the past 9 months was about to unravel. The professional reputation he had built, the trust he had earned from clients and colleagues, and the future he had envisioned in the security industry were all jeopardized by a single moment of instinctive reaction. The incident would be recorded by security cameras, witnessed by influential business leaders, and investigated by both hotel management and law enforcement. Within hours, Marcus would discover that the consequences of his actions extended far beyond losing a job or facing a lawsuit. The immediate aftermath of Marcus's kick created chaos in the hotel corridor. David Reynolds lay motionless on the marble floor, his breathing shallow and labored. Several witnesses shouted for someone to call 911 while others backed away from the scene in shock and confusion. Marcus knelt beside the fallen security supervisor, his training in first aid competing with his growing panic about the situation's implications. David was conscious but clearly in significant pain, clutching his chest and struggling to catch his breath. The precise kick had been more devastating than Marcus had intended. Lisa Chen took control of the scene with military efficiency, directing hotel staff to clear the area while coordinating with emergency responders. Her calm professionalism contrasted sharply with the chaos around her, but Marcus could see the concern in her eyes as she assessed the severity of David's condition. Within minutes, paramedics arrived and began treating David for what appeared to be fractured ribs and possible internal injuries. The hotel's general manager appeared, followed quickly by representatives from Blackstone Industries who were trying to understand how their product launch had devolved into a medical emergency. Marcus found himself standing alone in the corridor as the various officials huddled together, discussing damage control and liability concerns. He could hear fragments of their conversations about insurance coverage, legal exposure, and the need to minimize publicity surrounding the incident. The police arrived 20 minutes after the ambulance, led by Detective Maria Santos, a veteran investigator who specialized in assault cases. Her initial interview with witnesses painted a complex picture of the events leading up to the confrontation between Marcus and David. Jennifer Walsh, the journalist whose treatment had sparked the incident, provided a detailed account that was surprisingly favorable to Marcus. She explained how David had become increasingly aggressive and had physically grabbed her before Marcus intervened. Her video recording, which had continued throughout the confrontation, captured the entire sequence of events. However, other witnesses offered different perspectives on what they had observed. Some attendees described Marcus's kick as an unprovoked attack on a hotel employee who was simply trying to maintain order. The varying accounts reflected the confusion and rapidly changing dynamics that had characterized the situation. Detective Santos interviewed Marcus in a conference room away from the remaining event attendees. Her questions were direct and professional, focusing on his background, training, and the specific circumstances that led to his decision to use physical force against David Reynolds. Marcus answered honestly about his martial arts background and his current employment with Pinnacle Security. He explained the sequence of events as he remembered them, emphasizing David's inappropriate behavior toward the journalist and his own attempt to de-escalate the situation through verbal intervention. The detective's questions revealed the complexity of the legal issues surrounding the incident. Marcus's status as a private security professional created different standards for his use of force compared to what might be acceptable for an ordinary citizen defending someone else. Sarah Martinez arrived at the hotel within an hour of being notified about the incident. Her expression showed the professional concern of someone who understood the serious implications for both Marcus and Pinnacle Security. The company's reputation and future contracts could be jeopardized by the actions of any employee, regardless of the circumstances. The conversation between Sarah and Lisa Chen took place in hushed tones, but Marcus could see that both women were deeply troubled by the situation. Blackstone Industries had invested significant resources in the event, and the incident had overshadowed their product launch in the worst possible way. Hotel management conducted their own investigation, while the police completed their preliminary report. The security footage from multiple cameras provided a comprehensive record of the entire confrontation, showing David's aggressive behavior, Marcus's attempted intervention, and the physical altercation that followed. By evening, David Reynolds had been transported to City General Hospital for treatment of 3 fractured ribs and a bruised lung. His condition was stable, but the injuries were serious enough to require several days of hospitalization and weeks of recovery time. The medical report became a crucial factor in determining what charges, if any, would be filed against Marcus. The severity of David's injuries elevated the incident from a simple assault to a case of aggravated battery, which carried significantly more serious legal consequences. Marcus spent the night in police custody while prosecutors reviewed the evidence and witness statements. The holding cell gave him hours to reflect on how quickly his life had changed and how his split-second decision had jeopardized everything he had worked to achieve. The arraignment hearing took place the following morning in downtown criminal court. Marcus's attorney, James Morrison, was a former prosecutor who specialized in self-defense cases. He had been recommended by Pinnacle Security's legal department and had extensive experience with incidents involving security personnel. The charges were serious: aggravated battery and assault while acting in a professional capacity. The prosecutor argued that Marcus's martial arts background and security training created a higher standard of responsibility for controlling his actions, especially when dealing with confrontational situations. James Morrison's defense strategy focused on David Reynolds' inappropriate behavior and Marcus's legitimate attempt to protect Jennifer Walsh from what appeared to be an escalating situation. He argued that Marcus had acted in defense of another person and had used reasonable force given the circumstances. The judge set bail at $50,000, which Pinnacle Security posted on Marcus's behalf. However, Sarah Martinez made it clear that the company was suspending him pending the outcome of the criminal case and their own internal investigation. The media attention surrounding the incident was immediate and intense. Local news stations covered the story as an example of excessive force by private security personnel, while martial arts publications portrayed Marcus as a champion whose career had been destroyed by circumstances beyond his control. The coverage attracted attention from advocacy groups on both sides of the issue. Some organizations argued that the incident demonstrated the need for stricter regulation of private security companies, while others defended Marcus's right to protect someone from what appeared to be an abusive situation. Marcus found himself at the center of a public debate about the appropriate use of force by security professionals. The attention was unwelcome and made it impossible for him to maintain the low profile that might have helped his legal case. The civil lawsuit filed by David Reynolds' attorney added another dimension to Marcus's legal troubles. The suit sought damages for medical expenses, lost income, and pain and suffering resulting from the incident. The amount demanded was substantial enough to bankrupt Marcus if he were found liable. Pinnacle Security's insurance coverage for employee actions was limited, and the company distanced itself from Marcus as the legal proceedings continued. His colleagues were supportive privately, but the company's official position was that his actions violated their policies regarding the use of force. The preliminary hearing revealed additional complications in the case. David Reynolds' medical records showed a history of steroid use that may have contributed to his aggressive behavior, but this information also raised questions about whether Marcus should have anticipated an unusually violent response to his intervention. Expert witnesses testified about the appropriate use of force in security situations and the specific techniques that Marcus had employed. The martial arts community was divided about whether his response was justified, given the threat level and available alternatives. Marcus's former coach testified on his behalf, explaining the discipline and control that competitive martial arts required. However, the prosecution's expert argued that Marcus's training should have given him better judgment about when and how to use his skills in civilian contexts. As the legal proceedings continued, Marcus faced the possibility of significant jail time, financial ruin, and the permanent end of his security career. The incident that had lasted less than 30 seconds had created consequences that would affect the rest of his life, regardless of the ultimate outcome in court. The trial of Marcus Chen began on a cold Monday morning in February, 4 months after the incident at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, martial arts supporters, and advocates for both sides of the security industry debate that had grown around his case. Inside the courtroom, Marcus sat beside his attorney, James Morrison, watching as potential jurors were questioned about their views on self-defense, martial arts, and the use of force by security personnel. The jury selection process took 3 days, reflecting the high-profile nature of the case and the complex legal issues involved. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Chen, opened their case by arguing that Marcus had used excessive force against David Reynolds. They portrayed him as a trained fighter who had lost control and seriously injured an unarmed man who was simply trying to do his job. Security footage from the hotel played a central role in the prosecution's presentation. The video clearly showed David grabbing Jennifer Walsh's wrist and Marcus's subsequent intervention. However, the prosecutors focused on the moment when Marcus delivered the devastating kick, arguing that it was disproportionate to the actual threat presented. James Morrison's opening statement painted a different picture of the events. He described Marcus as a dedicated professional who had intervened to protect a woman from an increasingly aggressive security supervisor. The defense strategy emphasized David's inappropriate behavior and Marcus's split-second decision to prevent what could have become a more serious assault. The first week of testimony featured witnesses who had observed the confrontation from different vantage points in the hotel corridor. Their accounts varied significantly, reflecting the chaos and confusion that had characterized the incident. Jennifer Walsh proved to be a compelling witness for the defense. Her testimony described David's escalating aggression and his physical grab that had initiated the confrontation. She credited Marcus with preventing what she believed could have become a serious assault, and her video evidence supported her account of the events. However, other witnesses testified that Marcus's response had seemed excessive for the situation. Several attendees described David as firm but not threatening, and they questioned whether physical intervention had been necessary to resolve the conflict. The medical testimony regarding David's injuries was particularly damaging to Marcus's case. Dr. Elizabeth Torres, the emergency room physician who had treated David, described the severity of his fractured ribs and the potential for life-threatening complications from such injuries. The prosecution's expert witness on martial arts, Dr. Michael Rodriguez, testified that Marcus's kick had been delivered with championship-level precision and force. He argued that someone with Marcus's training should have been able to control the power of his techniques and choose less dangerous alternatives. James Morrison's cross-examination challenged Dr. Rodriguez's conclusions by highlighting the split-second nature of the decision and the unpredictable dynamics of real-world confrontations. He argued that textbook analysis of martial arts techniques couldn't account for the stress and adrenaline of an actual emergency situation. The defense called Marcus's former coach, Master Kim, to testify about the discipline and control that competitive martial arts required. The elderly instructor described Marcus as one of the most controlled and ethical fighters he had ever trained, someone who had never been involved in any violent incidents outside of sanctioned competition. However, the prosecution's cross-examination of Master Kim revealed that competitive fighting was fundamentally different from civilian self-defense situations. The controlled environment of a tournament bore little resemblance to the unpredictable circumstances that security professionals faced in their daily work. Marcus's own testimony was the most crucial element of the defense case. James Morrison had prepared him extensively for the questioning, but the pressure of explaining his split-second decision to a jury was intense. Marcus described his thought process during the confrontation, emphasizing his concern for Jennifer Walsh's safety and his attempt to de-escalate the situation through verbal intervention. He explained that David's physical shove had triggered an instinctive defensive response that he couldn't control. The prosecution's cross-examination was aggressive and detailed, focusing on Marcus's extensive martial arts training and his knowledge of alternative techniques that could have been less dangerous. Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Chen questioned whether someone with his background could claim that his response was truly instinctive, rather than calculated. Expert testimony about the use of force in security situations dominated the second week of the trial. The prosecution's expert argued that Marcus had violated basic principles of proportional response by using a potentially lethal technique against an unarmed opponent. The defense countered with their own expert, a former police trainer who testified that split-second decisions in confrontational situations couldn't be judged by the standards applied to carefully planned actions. He argued that Marcus had faced a legitimate threat and had responded appropriately given the information available to him. The jury deliberated for 3 days, reflecting the complexity of the case and the conflicting evidence presented by both sides. During the wait, Marcus experienced the full weight of uncertainty about his future and the consequences of that moment in the hotel corridor. The verdict was mixed, reflecting the jury's struggle with the competing interpretations of Marcus's actions. They found him guilty of assault but not guilty of the more serious charge of aggravated battery. The distinction suggested that they believed his actions were inappropriate but not maliciously intended. The sentencing hearing took place 2 weeks later, giving both sides time to prepare arguments about the appropriate punishment. Character witnesses testified on Marcus's behalf, describing his charitable work with youth martial arts programs and his exemplary service record with Pinnacle Security. However, victim impact statements from David Reynolds and his family painted a picture of ongoing physical and emotional trauma resulting from the incident. David's wife described the financial hardship caused by his extended medical leave and the fear that he continued to experience in confrontational situations. Judge Patricia Williams sentenced Marcus to 6 months in county jail, 2 years of probation, and 200 hours of community service. She also ordered him to pay restitution for David's medical expenses and to complete an anger management program despite the lack of evidence that anger had played a role in his actions. The sentence was lighter than the maximum penalty, but still devastating to Marcus's career prospects. The felony conviction would prevent him from working in private security, law enforcement, or any other field requiring background checks and professional licensing. The civil lawsuit filed by David Reynolds was settled out of court for any undisclosed amount that represented most of Marcus's savings and forced him to sell his apartment. The financial consequences of the incident would affect him for years to come. Marcus served his jail sentence in the county's minimum security facility, where he spent his time reading, exercising, and reflecting on the choices that had led to his incarceration. The experience was humbling, but also provided him with perspective on the true cost of violence, even when used with good intentions. Upon his release, Marcus struggled to find employment due to his criminal record. The martial arts community was divided about his case, with some viewing him as a victim of circumstances, and others seeing him as someone who had failed to control his training and abilities. Eventually, he found work as a supervisor at a community recreation center, where he could use his organizational skills and work with young people without requiring security clearances or professional licensing. The job paid significantly less than his security career, but it provided stability and a sense of purpose. 3 years after the incident, Marcus received an unexpected letter from Jennifer Walsh, the journalist whose treatment had sparked the confrontation. She had followed his case and wanted to express her gratitude for his intervention, despite the consequences he had faced. The letter helped Marcus find some measure of peace with his decisions that day. While he regretted the outcome and the injuries to David Reynolds, he remained convinced that he had acted to protect someone who needed help in a dangerous situation. Marcus never returned to competitive martial arts or professional security work, but he began teaching self-defense classes at the recreation center. His experiences had taught him valuable lessons about the difference between knowing how to fight and knowing when to fight, lessons that he passed on to the next generation of students who looked up to him.